Greetings, everybody. Today's supplemental episode was recorded over Labor Day weekend 2022 at DragonCon. It was our enormous privilege and honor, and absolute thrill, frankly, to be invited to host multiple panels at our favorite convention. You'll get a little peek behind the curtain as we discussed our process, answered questions, and had some laughs during the panel titled How to Produce an Actual Play Podcast.
Okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is the panel, How to Produce an Actual Play Podcast. We're really thankful that you're here. I hope everybody has your raffle ticket because at the end we have some really amazing things to give away, including some very cool items that were sent to us from Modifius, which we'll talk more about Modifius in a little bit here. First of all, we are the cast and crew and production team of a podcast called Starship Tempest. Everybody can introduce themselves real quick.
I'm Brian. I'm the GM, showrunner, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
He likes
That's
to
it.
confidence.
Concise.
I'm Ryan Sheely. I am the lead sound designer for the podcast, and I am also the captain of our crew. I play Captain Maddox on the show.
I'm Tara Sheely. I am, I'm the doctor on our ship, but also I'm our social media person and kind of marketing and all of that stuff. Yeah, that's me. And a moderator today.
I'm Matt Muller. I play Conrad Smythe, the science officer on Tempest, and I don't do anything else.
He's just the talent.
How do I get that job?
Talent.
I'm Travis Outer. I play Lieutenant Holden, the chief engineer on Starship Tempest, and then just assist a bit on the editing work, but mostly just play.
Yeah. Awesome.
I make Ryan and Travis's job harder.
That is
my goal.
That's also
You
true.
need a better computer.
I would like to do a little poll here. Raise your hand if you listen to any actual play podcasts.
Oh, fantastic.
Yay.
That's awesome.
Cool.
We chose a good title for this one.
Yes, we really did. Thank you.
Does anyone listen to Tempest?
Has anyone here listened to Starship Tempest?
Hey, a couple. Cool.
Thanks,
All
Drew.
right.
Thanks, Paul.
That's great. I'm glad.
That is awesome. And do you listen to other podcasts that are not actual play? Yeah,
just
right?
general
Podcasts are such a big thing right now, and it's fun. I think it's funny because when our parents and grandparents were growing up, they would listen to serials on the radio, right? And it's come full circle where we've gone through, Laserdisc and VHS and Blu-ray and DVD and all those things, and now we're back to radio form, basically. So I think that's neat. Anyway, okay, so we would like to show you a little sample of what it is that we do, and then we'll talk more about what producing it is like. We would love to field any questions that you have as we go along. Ours is a combination of an actual play podcast and sort of an audio drama. So we have married the two worlds, and it's a fine line to walk. So you'll be able to hear a little bit of what our podcast is, so you understand where we are coming from.
Yes, just to set it up a little bit further, when we do our campaign, when we sit down and record a session, once everything's recorded, we break the episode up, the mission up into usually 3 episodes, generally speaking. But we set up the entire mission with a cold open like Star Trek does, when the first scene before the opening credits, when it sets up what's going on. So that part of the production is entirely sound designed and scripted, and so that's sort of the real meat and potatoes of where we bring in the audio drama. The rest of that we filtered in a little bit more, but not quite as much as the heavy-handed cold open. So the trailer for Starship Tempest. Space, the final frontier. This is the campaign of the Starship Tempest.
The ship shakes and sparks fly into the bridge coming down around him. The captain gives the order to abandon ship. Do a roll for me to determine how much Tupperware they have in their inventory.
Right, what is that, fitness and security?
Yeah.
Because you fit in this pot roast in here?
Oh, Jesus.
Oh, get out.
No?
Freeze. All computer. Discontinue diplomatic simulation and save progress.
Muppet Man.
If you had done better on the sensor roll, then maybe Maybe your sisters would tell you.
Teal's best assessment is, I think it's Muppet Man.
Captain, we got Muppets.
We got Muppets.
Now rise for the Klingon anthem.
Pace depends on that power generator. So here we are.
Hold the line!
So he shoots the injured worm, essentially putting it out of its misery. Yeah.
And I look at him, I nod, and I tear off my underwear.
Vessels are irrelevant. Drones are irrelevant. Confirm suspension of current objective.
So do I have to roll to throw gushers?
Do whatever the you're gonna do.
Dr. Teal, fire the gushers.
Oh my god. So you can tell we don't have fun at all.
It's a very serious podcast.
It's a
is what
chore
we do.
to do. Yeah, so that's a little bit of what we do, and that is a very edited down version. The gameplay part is, the real substance, right, and how we tell the story, which is what actual play podcasts are all about. So, as the first thing we wanted to talk about is playing the role-playing game itself, because if you're looking to do actual play, the game has to be your number one thing, right? The thing that everyone is showing up again and again for, the thing that you've all committed to playing together and recording and thinking about finding an audience to listen to. So the game better be the right game. Brian, do you want to talk about being the GM and how to choose what to play, and how the characters can make or break the
First, can I throw a question out?
Oh yeah.
So, a bunch of people here raise their hands to listening to actual play podcasts. Who here plays tabletop RPGs of any sort?
Yeah.
Everybody.
Nice.
Cool.
Has anyone played Star Trek Adventures?
Travis
The-
is on it.
Same one as last.
The lens
Yes.
from yesterday.
Nice,
We're so
nice.
glad you're here.
Um,
So go ahead. I was just
Where's
curious.
Paul? I want to make sure you guys get raffle tickets.
Yep.
Are they good? Sweet.
Hunt them down, Paul.
Hunt them down. We want to
that's
give
to
you
the
things.
opposition.
We want to give you all the things.
What was the question?
Talking about being the GM when doing an actual play podcast, and
So it's a nightmare.
yeah.
No, it's not. Yeah, well, so I don't think we've actually said here yet. When we started doing this, none of us really had all that much experience playing RPGs. We actually have quite a bit of podcast and improv experience coming from that world. The part we didn't have was actually sitting down and playing the game, which included I had never GM'd before, really, in any capacity. So I've sort of had to develop or figure out a technique as I've gone along. And first of all, every table is going to be different, and every person is different. So every combination of different people is going to be different. For me personally, it's very much about the storytelling aspect of it. So I'm always trying to think in terms of story and what's an interesting kind of scenario. So I'm a wannabe writer for a really long time, and the part where I've always got hung up is trying to figure out what the characters actually have to do. I will come up with oh, that's a cool idea for a story or this and that, and but I don't know what the person would actually do for that. So the great thing about this is I can come up with a great idea for the scenario, and then they have to figure out what to actually do.
Right.
So that's the fun part for me.
That sounded really good in theory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we
Right.
started playing.
Yeah.
As anyone who's a player knows.
So Brian works really hard on our scenarios. We use Star Trek Adventures by Modifius, and Brian has taken that world and created his own stories and things for us to play through. And they're beautifully crafted, beautifully written, and we ruin all of it. So I think you start with the GM who has a strong idea, a strong concept, a strong ability to tell a story, and then you want players who are not going to be, I don't know, chaotic evil, maybe. Like, you want players that you know will work with you to solve your mystery, to get to the bottom of it. People who aren't just going to say, well, I don't care who killed whatever person, I'm going to go set stuff on fire. Like, you want a team that will come together and make this world real for your listeners. Because without the game, the GM, the players, you're not ready. You're not ready to go on the air. You're not ready for the podcast concept, I feel like. I don't know.
Yeah, and there's, so there's a lot of different systems out there. Obviously, if you're focused on, Star Trek Adventures is the current system right now. There are older Star Trek systems. There are also systems that are agnostic, right? That you can sort of adapt. What did you use, Travis, for the Kobayashi Maru Fate?
Yeah.
Which is one of those systems that, like, is not attached to any individual property. It's just a rule system somebody came up with that they can,
Anybody familiar with the Fate system?
Yeah, you guys
okay.
used it before? Okay.
Great.
The polar opposite of Star Trek Adventures.
Very different.
Yeah.
They're wildly different.
Yeah.
But yeah, very like there's a very like
right.
elegance and simplicity kind of a style, which Star Trek Adventures is a great system. It is not that.
It's not the simplest.
It is not a simple system. So yeah.
Well, and that leads really well into the next thing, which is the learning curve, right? So if you're taking a group together that you think, like, we would all have a blast playing this together, we can all commit to the schedule of recording, releasing, editing, all of that stuff, and then you realize, well, maybe two of us have never played before. Any RPG whatsoever, which was us. We'd never played anything before. So like the early season of our podcast was all about embracing that learning curve. And there were hours of recording time that were edited right out of there because we're like, wait, I'm sorry. So it's engineering and what's the other thing?
How does this thing work again?
Wait,
yeah.
okay.
Oh, wait,
So
okay, let me look.
what's
Let me do the rule book.
Yeah.
I'm sure you all have done this game.
Right, yeah. And so embracing that learning curve or having practice sessions before your first recording session.
Yeah.
And, scheduling time to really get the kinks out before you start recording and releasing those things so that when you're in your third season, you don't look back and go, oh my God, we were so green. Like, wait, we should have.
Well,
You will
A
anyway.
little of
You
both.
will.
A little of both.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it could be a little less squeaky in the first
Just
season.
to follow up and expound upon the embracing the learning curve, because if you are interested in producing a podcast, an actual play podcast, what you envision is going to be your product is not going to be the product when you first get it across the finish line and put it
Right.
out to the world.
Right.
And you have to be willing and able to accept that. And that's not something I'm very good at. I am, in fact, right before our very first mission episode that we released, I do the editing, I send it to Brian, he listens, he gives notes, and he gave me the okay. And I was like, okay, great. And then for the next 3 hours, I continued work on it and Brian's like, where's the mission? I was like, I was just tweaking a few things. And he's like,
For 3 hours?
no, like, I said it was done, get it up. So just embrace the learning curve and be sympathetic and genuine to yourself that it'll get better. And it's okay to not be fully polished right out the gates.
We heard an excellent quote last night in the podcast round table. She said, it was Sue from Women at Warp, and she said, "Released is better than perfect," and that write that down because that will change your life.
There's also Ira Glass, who does This American Life. He has this quote that I remember I sent to you early on as we were first starting to edit episodes, and we were both like, it's not, neither of us are happy, but what, and it's, I'm going to very paraphrase it, but like later Google Ira Glass and it'll probably come up, in the sense that like when you first start out, it's what you produce is not going to be what's in your head, and you have to push through that, right? And a lot of people, and I know personally I have done it plenty of times where you start in on a project and it's just not the beautiful shining thing in your that it was in your head in real life, and that's just a matter of like technique, right? That's the learning curve of learning how to do it and not doing it perfectly the first time,
Right.
or the second time, or the third, or the fourth, but still going back to bats every time until you really develop that technique.
Yeah, be kind to yourself.
Yeah, and it's like that's not a very intellectual process in the sense like it's not really a problem you can solve, which I'm not generally like I don't like things that are not that. But it's an emotional thing where you just have to kind of be emotionally stable enough to go, I did my best. That's still not good enough. I'm going to try again.
It's like any art form and
Yeah.
any creative process. It's never finished. You just you run up against the deadline.
And we also have a lot of people here have played, obviously, and probably have their own groups that they've been with. And I want to touch on the other side of the thing of the presentation style. If you're trying to produce an actual play podcast, the step between what's entertaining to yourselves while you're playing a game versus what you're playing and how you're playing, with the idea that someone else is going to consume this thing, right? Like the storytelling is different. We got through several test sessions before we realized, hey, we never actually say whether we succeeded or not after a roll.
Right.
Because we were just like, yay, and then we'd go on with the scene, and then we realized, oh, we need to say we had this many successes, and, Ryan adds in a sound cue every time, whether we succeed or
And
fail in a roll.
Critical successes or failures, because we would just move on and, without saying, like, actually, that one was really bad, and what happens, and,
Yeah, so a lot of those things of just keeping in mind, I think that, especially since this is a room full of people who seemed experienced, at least have played probably more than once, that extra step of going, the first couple sessions that you record, if you're actually trying to do this, are probably going to be you all listen to it and take yourselves out of the step of I was sitting there and I remember everything that happened in this thing. Maybe give it to someone else, like a friend that you trust, to be honest, but also not totally destroy your ego, and give you feedback of, I didn't really understand what was going on here, this didn't feel like it was explained, or this tangent went on way too long and I kind of lost track of things. Those presentation style, as noted, we did not have a ton of gameplay experience. Me and Matt were the only ones who had really done anything beforehand, but we've done theater and improv, comedy and stuff pretty regularly, so the presentation side was not the hardest learning curve for us. But if you have more like D&D background or gameplay background, that side is something you also have to try and do that learning curve and figure out, which, again, you just have to put yourself out there and just do more of it, and you'll just get better and better at it.
Absolutely. Well said.
And that's a really good point, too, that chemistry, if you're going to produce a podcast that other people are going to want to listen to, obviously chemistry is a really important thing, and you get chemistry by playing with people that you know and love and care about and have similar common interests. But you also have to walk the line of it not turning into an inside joke fest for yourself and your group, because that is something that we have fallen into the trap before, where it's like, oh, this is so funny, and then we're like, nobody in the world is going to find this funny other than us. So
nobody knows what we're talking about.
Is that me?
No,
mine's in the room. No. That's all right.
And to jump on that also, and what Travis was saying about explaining what people aren't there to see with you, sometimes Brian would send us, we use Roll20. Has anybody ever used Roll20?
Or any
Awesome.
other kind of virtual,
Right, so we play on Roll20, and Brian will send us a visual, right? He'll send us a diagram. He'll say, like, here's where you are on the ship, here's where the Klingons are, here's where whoever. And unless we talk about what we're seeing, we're not doing, like, we're doing a disservice to the listeners, right? Because they're like, well, do I get the diagram? Is it on your social media somewhere? Like, can I look at it at the same time? Which occasionally we'll do. Like, yeah, if you want to see the thing Brian drew.
And that's
Brian would love that.
Well, that's something I've struggled with in the sense of, like, okay, if making the map helps us to play the game, but then is that also putting it on easy mode for us in a way that makes it harder for the listeners? Right? Because if you keep it all theater of the minds, then that's a lot harder for us in the moment to play, to go, to say, oh, okay, the Klingons are over here, and the room is a square, and you're whatever. But that's how the listeners are going to receive it, right? So,
which I imagine, like, raise your hand if you play D&D, and your actual play podcast might be about D&D. The world of D&D is huge. You could be anywhere. And so unless you roll that into your storytelling, like, they're going to miss that part. Like, you could say, yeah, you're in a forest. Could you describe the forest? Like, it's part of that radio play, right? It's something that they need to be able to close their eyes and see anyway.
And I personally have never listened to an actual play podcast other than the one that we've done, just because I don't have the time. So this is an honest question that for everybody out there. When you are listening to whatever show that you prefer, are the environments changing when you if there's a scene change? Is there sound effects? Is there mood changes, music, or different ambience, anything like that? Yes or no? Go ahead.
Thumbs up?
Yeah.
Thumbs down?
Yeah, I listen to a couple of them. One of them that I love to listen to because it makes me laugh. They use sounds when they shift.
Yeah.
Use a
Oh, like a scene
transition sound.
transition.
Like they were in like this really dead zone for a while, and it was like creepy sounding, and then they went to this really lush area, and
Yeah.
you heard birds chirping.
Good, yeah.
Right,
Th-
and
that's
that's
exactly
right.
what I was going to get
That's
into. Is
creating that
I don't know if
sound
we're unique or
environment.
not. Apparently, we're not, and that's great because it's a fantastic storytelling device.
Right.
Just using the brain is already wired to listen to ambient, filter it out, and you only notice it if it's different. So when those scene changes happen, if you're producing your own podcast, really basic way to make it really clear that something that you just moved from point A to point B is doing exactly that. Take away the howling wind of the cave and put in birds chirping to say, oh, now I'm in a prairie or something like that.
A quick
Yeah.
follow-up question to that. Are those of you that do listen to...
Spider-Gwen had a question.
Go ahead.
So I listen to a podcast called Dungeons and Daddies. It's
Such a good podcast.
It's so good. Sorry.
It's okay.
And they'll sometimes, not all the time, but if it's a one-on-one thing, they'll do like kind of echoes in the background.
Yep.
And when they like echoes of things falling,
Oh,
but
sure.
it's not exactly ambience, it's more sound effects. Kind of
Visual
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what I've experienced.
Cool.
So, for those of you that listen to or do consume actual play podcasts, let me say actual plays in general, do you listen to them generally as podcasts, audio only, or something like a Critical Role that has, the camera set up where you're watching the people at the table? Both?
Both,
Okay.
yeah.
I usually listen to it when I'm bored.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that's something that, like,
Yeah. Driving, right. Huge.
yeah, because going into this, so
Yeah.
this all came about because a friend of mine had a really long commute to our office for a while, and so she introduced me to the Adventure Zone. And basically, it was like, yeah, that's awesome. This is great.
Yep.
I was like, this would be fun to do a Star Trek version with my friends. So, like, that's how I kind of first really consumed anything in the genre. But I'm more familiar with stuff like Critical Role and the stuff on Twitch, where you also have the visual component. So, that's still something I'm trying to work out about, like, what's the best way to approach that? What's the best way to tell the story, medium-wise?
Yeah, and a lot of that is we had a note here in terms of the type of actual play. We've tossed out some different. How do they handle this? And everyone's kind of like, well, sometimes they do this and sometimes they do that. And yeah, that kind of we broke it down into the categories of like, there's the people who just straight live stream their performance, right? They just throw cameras on themselves and they'll play for 4 hours on either a live stream or record it all and just release it. We have the ones that are record and release. Those typically more podcast based, but it's the same thing, just without sort of live streaming or video attached. Just we record it and then we immediately upload it, usually with some sort of like cleaning up the sound so it's not quite as harsh. And then the record, edit, and release, which is sort of what we do when we were talking about the hybrid version of, we go back and add sound effects. Some of the people, I've seen one or two that have sort of soundboards, so if they're doing it live, they have a couple at the ready, which
That's
is kind of a
cool.
thing.
That's so cool.
We have background in audio drama, like actual audio drama, like full-on shows. And so that's the way we approached it because that was the way that we knew.
Right.
Finding something that sort of fits your wheelhouse of what you already know is probably the easiest way to get into it because anything you can remove from the learning curve is better.
Totally.
You're going to be breaking into the learning curve and like pushing yourself out of your comfort zone in multiple areas, whichever way you go. So anywhere you can go, I already kind of know how to do this, or we have an experience doing on this side. How can we incorporate that to make sure we're kind of lessening the load as we're getting it all ready to try?
And then you can always add things back in as you go, where if your background is this, but you really want to go in this direction, it's It's a matter of, I don't know if anybody else is out there is like this, but we are definitely like, oh yes, we'll do a giant project, and just, we have no experience doing a giant
figure it
project
out.
like
I'm sure
this,
we'll figure
but
it out.
we'll do it.
Yeah.
Never done an actual play podcast before, so we're going to do a 7-season campaign.
Thanks, Brian.
Yep. So, anything you can do to avoid doing that is good, said the man who did not do that.
Paul, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to actually ask a question. Which do you think would be harder to produce? Would be the visual or the audio? Because I know, like with Outpost and a couple of the other audio drama Star Trek ones, there's a lot of the sound effect things that we were talking about earlier that changes the mood and the location. And
Totally.
the way things is. And in my mind, I would think that would actually be harder to produce those different sound effects.
So
I'm gonna start before Ryan goes on for a very long time about this.
Live stream that he does.
Right.
You know, it's all fun and games and stuff.
So the question,
There's a lot of editing.
the question was because we are actually recording this right now to release as a supplemental episode. So everybody say hi.
No, really, everybody yell hi.
The question was, would it be easier to produce the audio side of things or to have the more visual component to your podcast? So go ahead, Travis.
So my real quick answer to that would be, it depends on where your skill set lies. If we tried to just put a video cam on all of us and record us playing as we were going, especially when we first started this thing, we were not experienced enough players that it would have been horrible. I think it's our second mission. We had a whole bunch of ship combat, and ship combat in Star Trek Adventures is very clunky, especially if you don't know the ins and outs of that.
Right.
So that took us a very long time, and so the editing on that was not necessarily changing anything. It was always going in and saying, we, took 5 minutes to open up the rule book and look for something. And when we found it, we debated as to whether or not which one of us was interpreting it properly. And then and that can be helpful depending on what you're trying to put out. But for trying to tell a story, it was not entertaining. So if you're throwing a camera on yourself, you got to know the system very well. You have to have some level of performance where you can show yourself and have that sort of interactivity on camera. But if you're not great at the rules and playing the game part, the camera and doing it in a live direct release is going to be real dangerous because there's going to be a lot of stuff.
I would also piggyback on that to say that the scheduling for playing something live on camera in person versus we all live in different places in the country, so we're able to record our podcast on our computers and in our homes at different time zones and all of that stuff. So there's an extra variable of if the camera is going to be on everybody, or if it's a recorded Zoom call, does it, do your watchers want to see you just sitting and having a Zoom chat with friends for that amount of time, or so I think that's an additional part of it.
And then if you want to go the opposite direction and say, maybe we aren't as firm on the rules, or sometimes we can get onto tangents and maybe we want to try and streamline to make it a better listenable experience, you can do something like what we do, which is record, go through, kind of scrub the audio stuff, which has an entirely different set of also incredibly challenging problems.
Right.
I'll start before we go to Ryan, who deals with the harder stuff. Just to say, we record 4 to 5 hours. We all record on separate computers and then go to a shared drive. I'm the one that pulls all that down, puts them into a timeline on editing software. And my job is basically just to try and remove as much background noise, remove, when one of our dogs bark, the kids that regularly interrupt when they're not being super cute. We do try to leave those in if we can. And all of that stuff. And that's, there's 20 hours of footage in there. And sometimes you can get away with layering on top and listening at the same time, but you're still stopping and starting, and it takes, dozens of hours to just clean it. And then it goes to Ryan for the real work. So doing it in post doesn't necessarily make it easier. It just creates different challenges that you're tackling.
Yeah, sorry, jump. So if any of you come from a production background, you'll know that something that is edited like a movie is a very different style of production than, say, a concert, right? A live event, right? But there's still both incredibly complex processes, and it's really the same thing. It's just a matter of where the work lies, and they're different beasts in terms of what they do. And then after that, it's just a matter of how complicated and how polished can you or do you want to make it. But you know, if you've ever been backstage behind, you know, a live show or a concert or something, you know, it's a crazy, incredibly complex operation. It's the same idea.
Yeah,
but we had Ryan.
So the short answer.
But before
is,
Ryan talks, I'd like to.
The short answer
Matt. That was
is-
great. So.
I agree with everything they said. It is my birthday. Thank you.
Don't encourage him. He'll only get
my
older.
skill set does lie in audio drama, and we used to dabble a lot in short films when we were in college. So we had the video production side, but at that point, that skill set is so rusty and so behind the times. I have been fortunate enough to be the lead sound designer on 2 very successful audio dramas, both produced by Heart Life NFP.
Raise your hand if you've listened to Our Fair City or Unwell. Has anybody heard those shows?
Oh, okay. So I was the lead sound designer on Our Fair City, and I was the lead sound designer for the first 2 seasons of Unwell, and that's just where my skill set lies. So just to follow up with what they said, do whatever is going to be easiest for you so that you can lessen that learning curve to some extent. You've had your hand up, very patient.
Yes.
First of all, a privilege to sit in your panel again.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
I've learned so much, and so having learned a little bit, what's the financial outlay for a basic podcast system? Classes cost something, equipment, and then go from there with how expensive it could be and what kinds of costs we can look at.
Oh, that's interesting.
You can spend as much money as you want. I mean, you can spend tens of thousands of dollars if you choose, but we don't.
Also, if anyone has questions, interrupt us. Raise your hand. We'll get a mic to you as soon as we stop talking.
Matt, do you want to talk a little bit more about like the equipment that?
Well, I use the cheapest possible stuff. I record on Audacity, which is free, so that's fun.
Write that down.
Yeah, write that down. Audacity is free. It's not the best, but it's free. Especially for recording, it does the job.
Yeah.
And I'm recording this on Audacity below the table right now. So.
We all use the exact same mic to make the audio consistent.
Thank you to our Patreons.
Yeah, thank you Patreons for buying our mics.
That doesn't have to be expensive. I want to share the story about
do
our
it.
mics.
Yeah, go for it, Travis.
The first season when we did this, we all had different mics. Ryan, since he has worked on audio drama, he has good mics and good sound equipment stuff. Me and Brian had both bought snowball mics. There's one sitting over there. Matt was using just a headset he had lying around. And about halfway through season 1, I was trying to find something better because the snowball just wasn't working for me. It picks up everything. So I went online and started looking, and I didn't have a ton of disposable income, so I was like, what will work? And I was like, you know, what would make sense is telemarketers. They constantly have to be on the phone.
Yeah.
You have to be able to hear what the person's saying. They have to be able to hear you.
It's true.
So even if you can hear them talking.
Oh, that's funny.
And so there's a lot of them, so you know that there's a lot of microphones out there.
No, they're not all great.
No.
So I went and I looked up just best telemarketer headset to try and find one, and I found a cheap one. It's called MPAL. It worked, and I was like, I'll get this for now. It was only $20 or $25 off Amazon at the time, and I was like, I'll get this. It's going to be better than what, because the snowball picks up everything. You have to put like sound dampening stuff around it, which is tough to do in the house when there's a dog jumping up and down. And I used that, and I found that it was just really good. It wasn't as good as Ryan's good mic, but it was working better than anything else I had done, and better than.
And I will also say, just to jump in real quick and say, it maybe not the purest quality of sound, but it's you're going to end up compressing things to upload it, so you're going to have sound compression. Now you want to get the highest quality recording possible, but to Travis's point about the telemarketer headset, that mic is pretty good. It's actually pretty old at this point, but it's directional. So if I'm going over here and I'm fiddling with something during gameplay, my audio would shift. So it is that's a problem that he doesn't have, and it was a really good solution to that issue that we were running into.
That was also a really big problem with me in our early sessions, because I had just had a baby and we have 3 little boys, and so half the time we were recording and I am feeding a baby or changing a diaper or something at the same time, so my audio would go in and out because I would come back to it and I would like, okay, we'll roll for whatever, and I come back. So with this headset, it comes with me, and you can hear me all of the time, even though I'm doing 5 other things.
And at the end of season 1, we were trying to solve some of those challenges that we had. So it was like, okay, well, let's try and find something. So we went on and looked up gaming mics, like gaming headsets that had reportedly better mics and software systems embedded in them and stuff to try and clean up the audio. And we bought a full set for everyone and then tested them out. And it was like, the $25 one that I had worked pretty well. And
sounded better than the $100 ones.
Right.
Especially because we were doing some post-processing. So like it was easy to sort of remove some of the problems with that mic. So we ended up sending them back, getting it all back, and just bought the same telemarketer headset that was $25 for all of us, and that's what we all use now, just to keep everything simple. So yeah, like you can get away with cheap stuff as long as you look and you're getting creative about what you kind of do. The rest of us just use whatever laptop we have around. Matt has the oldest of the laptops.
It's actually brand new.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Matt has
But we did have a question.
The worst of our laptops.
Of prom.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, when you're getting towards your final product, how do you balance the crunchy mechanics of stats and rolls with the more fluid storytelling and role-playing?
That's an excellent question. To repeat the question.
Can we finish cost stuff? Because she was asking about like more cost.
Oh, cost stuff. Yes.
Right.
Okay.
I will come back to that.
I'll write your question down. We'll come right back to it.
So yeah, headsets. So remember, you're gonna have to buy mics. You can find a lot of cheap software. I do my cleaning in DaVinci Resolve, which is also another free editing software that you can use that has some audio cleaning type stuff. Ryan uses Audition, which is paid because it's Adobe. So you can get by without spending a lot of money to start with. The production value starts coming in later, particularly when you have the post stuff. As long as you have a computer that can run the stuff and record on something like Audacity, which is a pretty small program, you can get sound into the machine and you can start putting stuff together. The money starts coming in when you're trying to coordinate between people. You're paying for a shared drive. Paying for Google Drive to make sure we can all get stuff uploaded. If you're going to start doing video as opposed to just audio, you're going to have to all buy webcams, which is an additional cost. You have to make sure they're good enough. You have to make sure you're paying for a meeting space because Zoom is not going to get you good video or sound to do something like this. So you're going to have to find some sort of service to do that.
So for audio stuff, you don't need anything. You don't need anything especially computationally, super advanced to do audio. If you ever got into like videos, especially motion graphics or CGI or stuff like that's when you need the supercomputer. But to do audio editing, you don't need a computer that's too tricked out to get the job done. And then beyond that, there are a bunch of different basically services that you sign up for, and then because there's a million different podcast platforms out there, you just sign up for the one and you upload it to the one thing, and then it pushes it to Spotify and Apple and Google and iHeartRadio or whatever else and all the rest. And those have different levels of plans based on basically how much data and downloads you do, right? So right now I think our plan is like $40 a month, but you could go down as low as I think like 15 or 20, and then of course you go the other way too if you're doing 1 million downloads. But if you're doing 1 million downloads, then you're fine. You're fine. You're also
doing
fine. Yeah.
And also, you were asking about classes or anything like that, and I would say, sure, you could pay to take a voiceover class or workshop or something like that. You could, take a class for editing or whatever. But really, my advice would be what you're doing right now, to come to panels and listen to other podcasters and ask them questions. And this is the groundwork, right? Before you assemble all your notes and then okay, I think I got this. And then reach out into the community that is podcasters and just be like, hey, you do this thing. I'd really like to do something like that. Do you have any tips? And I tell you, 9 times out of 10, they're going to be helpful.
And don't be afraid to go for the simplest solution, which is to look for it on YouTube. I have a decade and a half worth of sound design experience, and I looked up how to do something in Adobe Audition on YouTube last week. So it's an incredibly useful asset that everybody has.
There's also some great websites out there like Udemy and Coursera and stuff like that have.
Can you spell Udemy?
Udemy. So not for audio engineering specifically, but our logo, basically at the beginning of quarantine, I was like, I wanted to learn how to do visual, design stuff forever. I'm going to take advantage of quarantine to actually sit down and teach myself how to do some of that. So this I made basically after taking a Udemy course on Adobe Illustrator. Cool. But Udemy also has podcasting and audio engineering and all sorts of other stuff. So like both YouTube but free stuff and Udemy courses or Coursera or whatever for like $15, or there's tons of great.
You can keep the
resources
cost
out there.
down to get something up and released.
Yeah.
At first, for sure.
Good question.
All right,
So-
our next question was, how do we balance the fluidity of storytelling with the crunchy stuff of rolling and things like that?
Did we get that right? Is that essentially
That's
it?
the question.
Okay.
Okay. Great. It's a great question.
We have Ryan do it in post.
Yeah, mostly that.
And I tell him he did it wrong.
Yeah,
Do it again.
That's true. So when we first started doing this, it was less apparent. We found a pretty easy solution for it, but it didn't
Being
present.
really crappy at the game.
But it didn't present itself right away. So it's one of those things where once the light switch went on, I was like, oh yeah, of course we're going to do that. So for us, every single time we have to perform a task as characters, Brian will tell us the difficulty. Brian will tell us what attributes and disciplines we need to use based on the Star Trek Adventures rule guides. And then we roll. We roll on roll 20 for us, or if you're playing at the tabletop, you can roll with dice, obviously.
Well, then we tell him it should be a different attribute because that one's better for us.
You left out a whole bunch of arguing with me about it.
That's true. But then I have developed Star Trek sounding sound effects, or computer rolling scrolling sound effects for when we succeed, when we have a critical success, when we fail, or when we have a critical failure. So those things really jump off the page, as it were, now for the listeners, so that we don't even have to. They don't have to wait for us to explain whether we lost or failed. We have to explain how much we lost or failed by, but at the very least, they will know instantly that we succeeded on a roll, instantly that we really failed a roll, and then we go on from there.
Yeah.
And in a larger sense, I think in the sense of like, okay, when you're listening to it and when we're going through an edit, that's part of our editing process where there'll be a moment where we're arguing, we're discussing like, well, should it work this way or should it work that way, or how does this exact rule work, or does it apply in this situation? And that's more of a feeling thing of, if I'm just listening to it and I'm starting to feel like it drags to me as a listener, then I'll make a note of it to Ryan and say, I think we're getting lost in the weeds here about this mechanic thing or whatever, and try to keep the story flowing. Yeah.
And he does that during the session as well, not just in the post. In terms of when we're playing, balancing the crunchy with the storytelling. Brian's vision, as he noted, long time, loves to write. The plan was the story was more important than the gameplay for us in that regard. So we try to limit the roles, but the roles also make it interesting, right? Like, if you try to do something rather than just writing whether it happens or not, doing a roll adds a layer of randomness and a layer of intrigue to every decision or action that we do. So we want to keep those moments there, and we want to do them regularly, but we still err on the side of, I think every GM does this to some extent. If you've, been in the middle of a battle that's run on a little longer than you planned, and someone says, I want to do this thing, maybe you don't make them roll that time. Or if you're really tired of them succeeding and you want to slow the game down a bit, you make the difficulty very high, which we then still succeed at, and Brian sighs a lot.
Yeah, I think there is an element of intuition of it, where you just have to be in tune with yourself as an audience member, even as you are the creator of, like, if I were listening to this with this drag, would I be tuning this out at this point, and just kind of having that sort of warning light in the back of your head, even as you're thinking about 20 other things at the same time.
But I will. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Sorry,
We'll just
Spider-Gwen.
go right to the question.
So the players in my game, they have never, ever played before.
Okay.
And I really want to record this, so I don't know if I should do a test session beforehand.
So that's a cool gimmick for yours, and like, I don't know if anybody's seen the old movie Gypsy with the song "You Gotta Get a Gimmick," but that's what I was gonna sing, and I'll just like spare you. But if your podcast has something about it that's gonna make it that thing that people will be like, oh, I want to listen to 5 newbies play, cool, or oh, I want to listen to people who live in different parts of the world play at the same time, or whatever it is, like your gimmick stay true to it as best you can, because that's what's going to build you your own community. That's what's, I mean, we have people who love the random things of our show so much that we can sit here and wear a logo with a bunch of animal characters and a Gushers logo with our name on it. And
we really love the Gushers
our
moment.
fans love our show so much that they're like, yeah, I need to put that on my body. And like, that's because we have our little community that we've built with our, our brand, so to speak.
Yeah.
Which leads.
Well,
to,
I would
direct,
say
to directly answer that question
Yeah,
for you, I would say absolutely recorded.
Yeah.
Okay. Because
Yeah.
one of our great regrets is that when we first started, our very first time we sat down, again, Tara and I had never played an RPG. Matt has had some experience in the past. Brian had never GM'd before. It was a disaster. It was an absolute mess of a game. Like we didn't even get past the first scene. And in retrospect, it was so funny, and we were laughing so hard at how badly we were failing. But we didn't record at that time. We did not have the foresight to record our prototype, experimental session.
Yeah.
And so even if you don't release it, at least get it in the can so that you can have it in the future.
Record it. Just don't have the expectation that this is going to be what you're releasing. These are tests, and you know that they're tests, so you can have fun with it.
Totally.
So what you might want to do is actually basically what we did, which is, you'll hear
missions from the book.
You'll hear no, not even that. In the sense like you'll hear like GM advice or role playing game advice of have a session 0 right before you start the campaign. Have this just so everybody can kind of get the vibe of everybody else and that sort of thing. We had like sessions -4 through 0,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And so we didn't. The one Ryan is talking about was like session -4, and we started recording, -3, 2, 1, and we just, so we have those somewhere, but we just didn't feel like those were ready yet, right? Like we didn't feel like that was it yet. And then when we got to a point where we played and like, okay, this is good enough that we feel like this can be the starting point. So you can maybe try that, like record and not kind of commit yourself to like this is episode 1 or whatever.
Right.
Just do it and see how you feel about it afterwards.
Got a question back there?
Yeah, so when you guys are uploading your podcast, do you guys find file limits as an issue? Like how much data can be in a specific file?
The question is about whether or not we run into file limit challenges when we're uploading our podcast.
No, not really, because when you export, so like the original WAV files or the uncompressed files are pretty big, but at least for Libsyn you have to compress them down to MP3s, which once you do that they're small enough that it's not really an issue. At that point it's just a matter of how much content you're uploading within a given time. So for Libsyn it's depending on the plan that you're paying for, it's so many megabytes per month or whatever it is. So that's more about, then it becomes more an issue of how long your episode is and how much content.
Sorry, we're doing the raffle in like 3 minutes if you want to hang around. All right.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Thank you for coming.
So then it just becomes a question of how many episodes over what span of time are you releasing? We're only doing 2 a month, so it's not that much. Even if I think we did once a week, we still wouldn't bump up against what our limit is now.
Yeah, we also split up our missions usually to 2 or 3 episodes, so each episode is an hour to an hour and a half, somewhere in that range, as opposed to releasing the entire session in one go.
Right.
That is also part of the fact that we do more post-production stuff as opposed to less. Like I said, if you're doing like the live release or something where you're just recording and then immediately releasing, since we're doing post, it takes a while. So like you get a third of it done and you go, okay, well let's start working on the next one, but they shouldn't have to wait for however long to get up there. So we just try to get them up as fast as we can. So we kind of split into 2 and 3 seems to be our go-to.
I've got brown hat and then blue shirt. Blue shirt guy.
So this is a lot more on the technical side of it, I guess. Yeah. I have no knowledge whatsoever when it comes to recording things. We mostly do D&D, but I'm looking to start doing like a GM thing as well, which I've also never done. It's like, it's a great start.
Godspeed, my friend.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, so you were talking about recording on Audacity, and we have recorded some of the sessions just like for a regular campaign we have, just to try it out and see how it goes, which is not great.
They never are at the beginning.
Yeah, so do you recommend like each person having a mic? Because right now we just have one, and so I was saying it would work a lot better just because like some people are more quiet or whatever that we each have.
Well, do you game in person or do you use?
Yeah, we are in person, which makes it easier, I think. I'm not sure.
It's different. Like that's since we all record separately, we all have separate audio tracks, which makes the post easier because we layer them all on top. And if someone needs to, if someone had to walk their dog or something, it's easy to just kind of cut their portion out, or has a conversation with someone off on the side, you can cut it out. If you have one mic, you could get crosstalk stuff. It's tough to isolate the voices.
Single track editing really does sort of limit your options.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, it's a situation where it's not so much more or less work, it's just shifting where the work is. But by having everybody in the same room on the same mic, it's a lot less work in post-production then, right? It's a lot less work than we do because we have all the different mics. But the flip side of that is it's a lot less work that you can do if you want to do it.
Less flexibility.
You're pretty much stuck with the performance that you had in the room on the day, and it's a lot harder to...
Yeah, so I think your decision would come down as to what your final product is trying to be. If it's a little more free-flowing and like we're just presenting what the session actually was, a single mic on Audacity. If you can, maybe upgrade the mic to try and get better sound, or situate it that way. Separate mics is possible. But I mean, since we haven't dealt with that, I wouldn't want to say like this is the way to do that setup because.
But even still, separate mics in the same room will still present a very challenging aspect to it because unless the mics are tuned in such a way that they're only picking up a couple inches away and everybody's very good at staying close to the mic, it'll pick up everybody's, and you're still going to end up heavy lifting on the editing just to clean the tracks enough so that the individual mics are the only armed track when you're in the final recording. So
and also as I noted, we record in Audacity, or I record in Audacity, because Audacity is really good as a free program to just pull it up, hit record, and you can get that audio into a file. I don't do any cleaning in Audacity or any sort of like effects stuff in Audacity because that's a little clunkier and doesn't have a lot of options. Like I said, I use DaVinci Resolve because it's free and has a decent amount of options. Audition is much better and has way more options, but it is paid. So if you're looking for just like we can get the sound into Audacity and what do I do from there, try to find a free editing program. Again, I use Resolve, but there are others out there, and I wouldn't say like use this one for sure. Use whichever one you can get into and get used to do some other stuff in a different program other than Audacity, because Audacity is pretty limited on that front.
Last question, and then we're going to give stuff away.
So mine is actually very much in line with more of like the theater people, and then the non-theater people essentially.
Sure.
So I actually do a live on Twitch as a player, and then we're starting to do more of a recorded and an edited thing as well.
Nice.
And one of the difficulties that I have found is that I have like years of acting, improv. I have the theater thing, and so like there's a way different energy that I bring.
Sure.
And then I have people that like can kind of catch up and kind of match it, and then I have like one or two people that are just like they just cannot bring that energy to the table. And so I guess more directed to Matt and Travis, who have done more acting stuff. Were there
Yeah, we've all been.
We've all done it.
Oh, sorry.
That lucks it out. Yeah, it makes us lucky.
Yes. We did.
Yeah.
All of us.
We actually met in college at our college theater troupe. So.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, then maybe it doesn't pertain too much.
Sure.
But I guess maybe in a more open field then.
Sure.
What is there like? What would you recommend that I can do with these one or two other people that just can't seem like they come to the table and it's like, yeah, I want to play D&D, but it's like, yeah, I want to play D&D.
Are you the?
It's like, come on, man! Like we need to. Like,
are you the GM of this?
We need more energy. We need bigger. Like where is this?
Right.
Are you the GM, or are you just another player and you have a different GM?
So in the recorded and edited one, I am the GM. In the Twitch one, I am a player.
Okay.
But I do both. I played so much D&D.
At least from I'm going to jump on Brian's toes here in terms of the GM view. I feel like one option is to try and think of ways to story scenarios and steering the story scenarios to sort of force those people into the forefront, just because then they have to be in it. Because, I mean, you said you've done years of that sort of work, like theater or acting and those sorts of things, and no one's instantly great at it, right? Like it takes time. Some people can bring the energy, but there are also really good actors that don't just bring tons of energy, and a lot of that is just experience. And maybe they've just never had the chance to sort of like be standing out front of everyone and doing a thing. And as they get more comfortable, maybe they can, and that just takes time. We have some where it's like we notice that a character hasn't done a lot in a mission or two, and so Brian has sort of been like, in this mission we're gonna have like Teal is great in mysteries, and so after a couple missions where we did a whole lot of fighting stuff, because Holden is the not quite murder hobo but similar enough of the group, as at least as you can be in Star Trek Adventures, which does not really gear well for that. After a couple missions where it was like me and Maddox doing a lot of stuff, it was like, oh, we need a Teal episode, and the one episode, and these are fairly early on when we're still finding our feet wet, the one Teal heavy episode was we had this mystery, and she was like solving the mystery and basically solved it for all of us because we were totally lost without her. So Brian did a little bit of a more mystery one so that we could help push her into the forefront to make sure that everyone's kind of getting included and giving them the opportunity to do that.
Totally.
Can I ask, so these people, like, what are they bringing into the table? What is their strength that you're bringing them to the table for?
And that could be rhetorical too, like something to think on, like what are that's for everyone. Like
I definitely chose them for
right.
Like,
so
not only are we close, they are learning, or they're becoming more familiar with narrative first, because they're a little bit younger, so they're more in the video game crowd. And when they first started, it was like mechanics. I have to build the biggest and the best.
Oh, I see.
It's like,
Min-max.
But I don't do that. Like,
Yeah.
GM, like I will 100% crush your character if you try to bring me the max build. You'll die and have to make a new one.
Yeah.
But like as they're learning that, they do bring more of like a subtle flavor.
Yeah.
And they're great when we're not recording and trying to be performative.
Yeah.
And like performative play is a lot different
Totally.
than table play.
Absolutely.
And so like table play, they seem good. Performative play,
it's harder.
It's like
So
I want to pull more out of
Yeah.
So the reason I asked that question and asked it that way is because obviously you are bringing them to the table for some reason. They have some strength, right? And that's not necessarily it. Like when we started doing this, I definitely had to I don't want to say expectations, but my bet is like Travis's strength is going to be here and had that, but something that Travis has really pushed himself to do, which I'm is so grateful and impressed with.
I was the min-max kid.
Travis is very much because we're all best friends, so we all know each other. Travis is going to be the rules lawyer. Travis is going to figure out the loopholes and the min-max, and
totally
I want him there to serve that function. And I know that that's not Tara's vibe. Tara's going to bring a whole different vibe to it, and Ryan's going to bring a whole different vibe to it, right? And so it was
and Matt.
And Matt and TJ, and everybody's going to bring a different thing to it, and I had that in mind. So my suggestion or my advice would be to okay, think about the strength that you're bringing them there, play to that strength, and then once they're really showing off that strength, then push them to the next step. So let them min-max, let them come to you with a min-max, and then push them beyond that.
All right, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you guys so much for
Have a
coming.
wonderful
Really
con.
appreciate it. And thank you for listening to this episode of Starship Tempest. And I would also like to thank you for diligently wading through the season break while we are working hard on Season 3. I can officially tell you that Season 3 will be released. That's right. We're going to release Season 3, and okay, fine, it's going to be this summer. I don't have an official date for you yet, but it will probably only be several weeks away at most, so just keep listening. We're going to be right back to our missions as soon as we possibly can, and it will be in the not-too-distant future. In the meantime, keep interacting with us on social media under the handle Starship Tempest. You can find us on all the usual platforms, and as always, we'd like to tell you to stay safe, be kind, and we'll see you out there.